So, just to say hello to everyone and our newbies, my name is Amber Cobley and I am a PhD student and I also work a bit as an environmental consultant. I'm based in Southampton in the UK. We've got some people joining us from abroad as well, which is really exciting. And I work specifically on deep sea marine biology, which I did a session on a few weeks ago. But my main thing I'm working on at the moment is hydrothermal vents. Now, some of you will have seen these on Blue Planet. Some of you will think I'm crazy and never have heard of them before. So I will not keep you waiting any longer. This will take about 15 minutes. I've got some videos and pictures and everything to show you. So if you just wait 2 seconds while I start sharing my screen, and off we go. Okay, can I get some thumbs up if you can see the presentation? Awesome, I can see thumbs up. Okay, so I will get going. Oh, hang on. There we go. Okay, it's back. Okay, so today we're going to be talking, oh, hang on, I've got some people joining. I'll put them over there. There we go. Today I'm going to be talking about hydrothermal vents. So you might remember that in my first presentation, I told you that everything that lives in the deep sea, which is this area here, above 200 meters. So see this line at the top here, everywhere below 200 meters is classed as the deep sea. And you might remember that I told you that it relies on marine snow, which is bits of dead animals and plants and poo that falls through the water column. And I told you that that's what everything in this kind of black area eats, isn't it? Well, I might have been not telling the whole truth. There are these environments that can live without this marine snow. And I'm going to tell you why they're really cool. And I'm going to tell you some of the crazy adaptations that they have. But first of all, what are these environments? So first of all, at the bottom of the deep sea, in areas of the sea floor where there's lots of volcano activity, yes, there are underwater volcanoes as well, there are these huge chimneys, which have the scientific name of hydrothermal vents. Here, there are some animals that can live without energy from plants or the sun or marine snow, and it's really, really amazing. So first of all, what is a hydrothermal vent? How are they made? And where are they found? Hydrothermal vents, as you can see in this picture here, are huge underwater chimneys which spew out large amounts of super hot water. And that's what all that cloudy water is there. That's really hot water coming out of the top of these chimneys. This water can be up to 450 degrees centigrade. So to put an idea of how hot that is, the water in your kettle is 100 degrees. So it's more than 4 times hotter than the kettle water that you would make your cup of tea with. So let's see if we can start this video. Our planet is covered in a crust, which is, if you can see at the top of this video, it's this brown layer at the top. So it's quite thin. And it's basically, this floats on a layer of molten rock, which is called magma, which is this orange bit you see inside the Earth. This crust layer is formed when this hot magma, you see it comes up, and in the middle there's this big crack. When it spews out of this crack, basically it cools down and it turns into rock. And that layer is what makes the rock crust layer all over our world. This happens at many places around the world. There's lots of big cracks like this all around the world. And all these edges add up to make big tectonic plates, they're called, of crust. So there's big plates floating. Some of these plates are called continental plates, and they are the ones where you find land on top of them. And some of them are called oceanic plates, which is what we're going to be talking about today. And as you can probably guess, these are the ones that are found under the sea. And at the edges of these plates is where you find hydrothermal vents. So let's get this video going here. So in a second in this video, you will see what plates look like here when you're looking down on the world, those kind of lines. And then this video bit here is what vents actually look like under the sea. But how are they made? Well, basically, at the bottom of the ocean, the water is very cold, about 2 degrees centigrade on average, which is almost the temperature of freezing. And this is shown by these blue arrows you can see, which I've paused on here. There are lots of little cracks in the oceanic crust, and so this cold water sinks into them. As it sinks deeper and deeper, if I restart the video here, and I'll pause it, you can see it gets near the orange bit, the magma, this rock layer that is melted. And as this cold water gets closer to the magma, it's very, very hot, so the water gets heated up. Now, inside the crust, there are lots of metals and minerals. And when this water is heated up, some cool chemistry basically means that these metals and minerals come out of the rock in the crust and dissolve into the water. So as this water gets hotter and gets more full of metals and minerals, what you might be thinking now is, if you've learnt this at school already, heat rises. So cold things sink and hot things rise. And so as this water gets hotter, it begins to rise back out of the oceanic crust. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. It begins to rise out of the oceanic crust. And it can be really quickly, which you can see in this picture here. It's kind of being forced out. When this really, really hot water comes out of the crust, it's hitting the really, really cold water from the bottom of the sea. And again, some weird chemistry basically means, which you'll see in the video in a sec, that all the metals and minerals that were dissolved in the water now come out as these kind of black lumps. I don't know why it keeps doing that. There we go back to that one. So the metals and minerals come out as these pieces of black lumps, and they are what build these chimneys under the sea, which you can see getting bigger and bigger here. And that's how hydrothermal vents are made. So here's a little bit of video about more about what they look like, because they're really beautiful and I want to get as many videos as possible in there for you. And these huge chimneys can be up to 30 meters tall. But one thing you might be noticing in this video, that even though it's super hot and super cold at the same time, and there's no light, there are animals that live here, which is crazy, which is why I love to study them, because they're really, really weird. So, what are the animals like that live there, and what weird adaptations do they have that let them live there? So this bit's a little bit more difficult, but it's really much easier if you've learned about photosynthesis at school already, which I imagine quite a lot of you will have. So the word photosynthesis can be broken down into two smaller words. Photo means light, and synthesis means putting together. Now at these vents, there's no photosynthesis, which there is to support all the other ecosystems and food chains on the planet. What we have instead is chemosynthesis, and you probably haven't heard about this before. But we can break it down and make it quite simple, because you can break it into two words again. So chemo means chemical, and synthesis still means to put together. So we can see that both of these processes are putting things together. The only difference is photosynthesis uses light and chemosynthesis uses chemicals. But what are they trying to make? Well, as you might remember from photosynthesis at school, they're trying to make food energy. So, photosynthesis, as you probably all know, I'm probably telling you things you've learned at school, is where plants take in light energy from the sun and they make it into food energy, which feeds a plant. Chemosynthesis is a very, very similar process, but there are, as you can see at the top here, ooh, get my cursor, there's bacteria instead of plants. And the energy used is from the hydrothermal vent plume, so it's chemicals. And one of those chemicals is called sulfide. And they use these to make food energy instead of light. If you want to know something really disgusting about sulfur, it smells like rotten eggs. So they're basically making food out of stuff that smells like rotten eggs, which is really disgusting. But importantly, the process of photosynthesis, as I'm sure you all know, is at the base of our food chain on land, because plants make energy from light for themselves, and then animals come along and eat the plants and take their energy. Oh, just got someone joining, I'll add them in. It's the same in the sea, as we learned in the first session. Because animals come along, so the phytoplankton that you can see here are these tiny plants that live in the sea, and they also do photosynthesis from the sun and make food energy, and then fish come along and eat those phytoplankton. So we already knew this already, but this is where we get into the food chain at vents and where it's completely different. At vents, the food chain has chemosynthesis at the base of the food chain, not photosynthesis. And so the bacteria at the base of the food chain, not the plants. These bacteria are making energy from chemicals in this hydrothermal vent plume, and the animals are coming along and eating the bacteria instead of plants. So basically, the really cool thing about hydrothermal vents being chemosynthetic environments is that they don't rely on sunlight. So we know that if the sun blew up tomorrow and all the animals and plants around the world, in the sea and on the land, would have food, no food, and they would die, including us. But these ones at hydrothermal vents would survive because they use chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis, to survive in their food chain. So they can live without the sun. The not so cool thing is if you lived there, everything would constantly smell like rotten eggs. So that's not great, but at least you wouldn't die if the sun blew up. So there's always, you know, some pros and cons. So shall we have a look at some of the cool animals that live there and the adaptations that they have? So one of the things these animals have to adapt to here is to be able to get food from these bacteria instead of plants. They have to be quite clever about it because, as I said, this water is up to 450 degrees centigrade, which is, as I said, 4 times hotter than the water that comes out of your kettle. So they have to be really careful how to get to these bacteria in clever ways without burning themselves. They might boil themselves. My favourite adaptation example that I'm going to share with you today is the yeti crab. And it's called a yeti crab because, as you can see here, it's all fluffy and white and it looks a bit like a yeti. Another name for it, which the parents will get, is the Hoff crab, because it's got hairy chest like David Hasselhoff. Yeah, kids, I know you are way too young to remember this, but there you go. It was an accident that it got that name. A reporter heard scientists calling it, I think, as a joke, and it's now forever been the Hoff crab. But it's also known as the yeti crab. They discovered it about 7 or 8 years ago. So that's another amazing thing about the deep sea and hydrothermal vents is we are discovering new species all the time. So if I play this video for you, what you'll be able to see is these crabs are waving their arms in the air. And when scientists first saw this, they were really, really confused. Now they know that crabs on land, no, not on land, but in shallow water are quite territorial. And so they thought maybe this was aggressive behaviour to kind of intimidate the other crabs. And this kind of started making sense when they saw some other video footage. And they saw that these crabs are found in really, really dense numbers. So as you can see here, they're all piling in on top of each other, and you can get like 2,000 crabs per metre squared, which is crazy. And so you can see this shimmering water on the left, where the water's kind of all shimmery and you can't see properly. That is the really hot water. So if that crab on the left here moved ever so slightly to the left, it would burn its bum. And if it moves ever so slightly to the right, it will be in the super cold 2-degree water and it would freeze. So it's a really difficult environment. So these scientists thought, oh, maybe they're waving their arms in their air to be territorial and to make sure they keep in their little space and that the other crabs don't move in on their space. And this is similar to what crabs do in shallow water. They like to be quite aggressive and fight. So it all made sense until, let's have a look at the next video, until they brought them up and put them in these big pressurized tanks. And what you can see here, it's quite a fuzzy video, but basically it's got special bits in its mouth that it's coming out, and what it's doing, it's combing its chest hair and it's combing its arm hair with weird fuzzy bits that come out of its mouth. And no one could work out what was going on until they realised what they were doing. Do you remember those chemosynthetic bacteria I told you about? What they've done is got some of those bacteria and they've rubbed them on their chest hair and they've rubbed them on their arm hair, and they've basically made like arm farms. So they're farming this bacteria on their chest and arms, and then when they have enough, they use their mouth parts to scrape it off their chest hair and their arm hair, and that's how they make sure that the bacteria are always nearby and they don't have to go into the super hot or super cold water to live. So the reason they were waving their arms in the air is because they can't live in the really hot water that has all the minerals that the bacteria need. And so they're waving their arms in the air. So every so often they put their arms in the air to get into this hot water with lots of different minerals. And then these minerals, you know, like with plants on land, we fertilize them. So people put fertilizer on plants to make them grow better. That's what these are doing. They're fertilizing their arm farms by waving them in the air. Now, I think that's really cool. I also think they're quite cute. I don't know what you guys think. I think they're quite cute. They're a bit fluffy, but we don't get many cute animals in the deep sea, so I might be a little bit biased there. So that's one adaptation that an animal has to be able to live at these vents and eat these bacteria without having to go in the crazy hot water. Another one is what these tube worms do. Now these are worms, but they live in tubes. So the white bit is a tube. The red bit at the top is the top of the worm coming out, and that's their gills. These worms have gills because they live under the water. And then in the tubes, the rest of the worm lives. And inside the tube is the bit of the worm that has a gut. And what these tube worms do is they get some of these chemosynthetic bacteria and they put them inside their bellies. And then these bacteria live in the belly of the tube worms, and the bacteria make food from the chemicals coming in from the vent plume, and the tube worms get the energy from the bacteria as they make it, which is really cool as well. And that's called symbiosis, where two animals or organisms live together and benefit each other. So the tube worm gets food from the bacteria, and the bacteria gets a safe home away from predators. And then another super weird one that was only discovered again a few years ago. This is called the scaly foot snail. So first of all, the bit that you see when you look at your garden snails, the bit that you see on the outside, the slimy bit, that's basically one giant foot. That's all it is. It's a giant foot. It's reduced, it's lost a lot of other body parts, and it's basically turned into a giant foot with a very small head. So this foot that sticks out of the shell, what you can see that makes it different to like a garden snail here is it's got all these scales and plates on its foot. And what it does is it gets underneath it gets bacteria, these chemosynthetic bacteria, and tucks it underneath its scales. And then the even weirder bit is it has a really long tongue called a radula, and on that tongue are spiky teeth. And so it has this really long tongue with teeth, and what it will do, like the crab did with its mouth parts to scrape off the bacteria from its chest, this snail will use its really long tongue to get the bacteria from underneath its scales, and it'll also go along the edge of the rock and scrape this bacteria off with this spiky tongue as well. So we've got so many weird adaptations that these animals have at hydrothermal vents. But like I said, the really cool thing about this is that they found all these ways of getting food without having to rely on anything to do with photosynthesis, like every other organism in the entire world has to do. So I think that's pretty cool. So there you go. We now know about hydrothermal vents. We know that they are big chimneys found at the bottom of our oceans at the edge of tectonic plates. They have super hot water coming out of them, which has lots of chemicals in. There are bacteria that live at these vents, which do a process called photosynthesis, called chemosynthesis, which is like photosynthesis. The bigger animals that live here, like the crabs and the tube worms, eat the bacteria in lots of cool ways. We had arm farms on crabs, we had worms with bacteria growing in their bellies, and we had snails with spiky tongue and scales. If you Google hydrothermal vents, you'll find loads of other cool animals that live in these places as well. And it would be great if you found other vent animals and their adaptations and shared them on the Facebook group so everyone can see. There were so many I couldn't talk about today because I didn't have time, so it would be great for you to be able to see them through the week. So that's enough from me. I'm going to keep this video running until the end. But if you want to start putting your hands up if you've got any questions, and you can ask me anything you like about hydrothermal vents. So I'll just give it, I think this has only got, how long has it got? About half a minute left maybe. So I'll leave you to watch the rest of it. Okay, so let's stop sharing the screen. Let's come back here. Can you all see me again? Okay, let's have a look. So I think Amelia had her hand up first, so I'm going to unmute you, Amelia. Off you go.
Is it all right if I do 2 questions?
Of course it is.
So my first one is how far does the hot water come from the vent?
How high does it go?
How high does it go?
Oh, how high does it go? That's a really good question. So where you would actually be able to see the water probably goes about 100 meters. So if you were shining a light down there with a big robot, it would go about 100 meters up.
Maybe.
But all the chemicals and everything found in it go really, really far. Now, actually, we don't know just how far it goes, but it's on the scale of kilometres. So these chemicals go out into the sea, up into the water column, and horizontally as well, 4 kilometres. And so the way that we can find out where hydrothermal vents are without having to send a camera down there, because you know, it would be pot luck as to whether you were going to find it. It's literally like trying to find a needle in a haystack. What you would do is on the back of a boat, you have a machine that you would tow along, and that would pick up the chemicals in the sea. So you can pick them up quite close to the surface as well. So it does go really, really fast. So you'd pick up these chemicals and then you'd be like, the chemicals make it look like there might be a hydrothermal vent nearby. And that's how you then know to look in that targeted area to find it and get videos like we got that I showed you today. But it can go kilometres. But you wouldn't be able to see it. You could only pick up the chemicals, but you could probably see it about 100 meters high. And did you have another question?
Yeah. How far does some like the sea snails that you were talking about in the deep sea, do they climb up the vent?
They climb up the vents, yes, they do. So the actual sides of the vent, most of the water, so if you've got a vent like this, most of the water will come out of the top, so the super hot bit. So the rock around it will just be a bit warm. So what they can do is they can live in that bit, and that's where the bacteria will live. So they'll go along the rock, and some of the bacteria make mats. So they all join together and make a mat that you see around the outside of the vent, and they'll go along with their little spiky tongues and rasp all of this bacteria off. So yeah, they live up and down all the sides of the hydrothermal vents. The only thing that could go wrong is if there's a side vent. So sometimes if you've got a hydrothermal vent like this and all the water's coming out the top, sometimes if there's a little weakness in the side, water can start coming out of the side. So they have to avoid those. But they can sense all the chemicals. They're very, very clever, because obviously they can't see because it's super dark down there, but they can sense the chemicals, so they know where to avoid the really hot and really chemically water. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, so next up we have got Billy, Tommy and Ted. I'll unmute you now. Off you go. Oh, I can't unmute you. Oh, there you go. You're unmuted. Off you go.
How big can snails grow up to?
How big can these snails grow up to? So these snails, it's really annoying because at work we have one that's preserved that I could show you, but they basically grow, they're about that big. So they're not huge. So they fit in the palm of your hand, if that helps you know how big they are. But they're found, like the crabs, you find them in really, really dense populations. So you look at the side of a vent and they will be covered in thousands and thousands of these snails. So they stay quite small like that, but there's thousands and thousands of them. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Next up, I think we've got Ethan on a different device to usual, which is very confusing for me, Ethan. Okay, off you go.
I just want to say it's not a different device.
Sorry, it's been reset, hasn't it?
No, my iPad was wiped.
It was wiped. Oh, well, hopefully you didn't lose anything too dramatic.
Yes, I did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, at least you can still join us today.
Yeah. How hot can the hydrothermal vents get?
So the hottest one recorded, so I said it can get up to 450 degrees centigrade. I think the hottest one recorded was actually like 463 degrees centigrade. So I was saying earlier before you joined, I think, before you managed to get on, I think that's almost 5 times the temperature of the water in your kettle. So it's really crazy. So yeah, it's super hot, but depending on where they are and how far away they are from these big cracks in the middle of the ocean, how far they are away from the edge of the tectonic plate, depends on how hot they are. So they're all different temperatures. So some of them are just like 150 degrees, which is still quite hot. And then some places you don't even have these big chimneys because it's a bit cooler. And what you have is just, you know, when the road gets really hot in the summer and it looks like it's shimmering over the top of it when things get really hot and the air kind of goes all shimmery like this. You get areas in the deep sea where this water isn't spewing out in big waves, but it's just got shimmering water because it's coming up through very, very tiny cracks and kind of through the sand at the bottom, and it's shimmering. And so you'll get hydrothermal activity here as well. So that might be a bit cooler, like maybe like 72 degrees or something like that. But the chemosynthetic bacteria still live there. So there's lots of, it's not just hydrothermal vents, there's lots of like other things like shimmering pools and things like that you find as well. This might be a bit cooler. Yeah, hottest one, I will check the exact figure for you. But I think it was about 463 or 468 degrees centigrade or something like that, which is quite hot. Those crabs would definitely burn their bum if they went the wrong way. Okay, is that a good answer to your question?
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Ethan. Okay, next up. Oh, I think we've got, I'm not sure who this is as it doesn't have the name, but I'm going to unmute you now. So hopefully you'll see being unmuted. Okay, you have been unmuted.
Hi, it's Annie Daniel. Sorry, Amber, my iPad doesn't say my name.
That's all right, don't worry. Hi, nice to see you.
Thank you, and you. I was just going to ask, you've touched on it in your last answer, but I was just going to further prompt you a little bit and say, how do the animals survive those really, really extreme hot temperatures? Do they just kind of, the ones that catch it would like die and the rest would survive, or do they know to get out the way? Or
yeah, so that's a really big kind of known and unknown that we as scientists study quite a lot. So we know that the first part of the question, where how do they know, they have lots of receptors all over on the outside and inside of their bodies that mean that they can tell what chemicals are in the water. So they know if they're getting too close to the plume because they don't want to be near all those chemicals. And they can also feel the temperature as well changing in their body with all these different receptors. But these animals themselves, including the bacteria, don't necessarily live right in the plume where it's like 450 degrees. what they'll do is they'll live slightly next to it. So the bacteria can live, are some of the ones that can live in the hottest parts. So the bacteria will grow these big dense mats, and some of them will be in areas where bigger organisms like crabs and fish wouldn't be able to live. And what will happen is they produce what we call organic matter. And as they die, they will start to rot and die down, and then they will produce organic matter, which kind of just is mud and things like that. And then other animals can come along and eat the organic matter, but that will kind of fall further away from the hydrothermal vent each time. So there's a kind of zonation where right in the middle, you've got the really what we call extremophiles, which are these bacteria that can live in the really hot areas, and some animals such as polychaete worms. There's some that are really cool, like worms that you find in the garden, but they live down at vents. Some of those can live really close as well. And then as you move further out, we have what you call zonation. So animals that live in a little bit cooler water, and they have to have different adaptations for the different types of bacteria. So there's a whole zonation as you move away, but there's only a few of these extremophiles right at the center, but arguably they're the most important part of the ecosystem, because they're basically the equivalent of the plants, because without them, there would be no organic matter for this whole ecosystem to be able to live. So is that answered all you asked?
Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. Thanks, Amber.
Thank you. Nice to see you. Okay. Next up, I think I'll just check the chat in case we've got any questions in the chat, which I think we do. Okay. In the chat, we've got, are there any bigger animals living around the vents? And that's from Finny. Okay, yes, there are. So as I was saying there, you've got this kind of zonation. And so right next to the vents, you don't really have very big animals, because they're not the animals that are able to live in this extreme environment. But as you move a little bit further away, I'll post some pictures, but you get these fish called zoarcid fish, which were in one of the videos, so I can post that. And they kind of look like a big fat eel, and they're kind of about this long. And so they come in and live there. And then often you might get right a bit further away where all these kind of animals are living, you'll get sharks come in, and the sharks will come and feed on the invertebrate smaller animals as well. You get lots of bigger fish come in as well. So I can try and find some pictures of bigger animals that live there. And also what you can get right on the edge of the hydrothermal vent, you get lots of really big corals growing. So we do get corals in the deep sea as well, which is really cool. And you also get lots of big sponges. So that's what SpongeBob SquarePants is based on. He's a sponge. But these are really big sponges as well. So hopefully that answered your question. But yes, lots of bigger animals do take advantage of this. Okay, next up we have got... who have we got? I think we've got the triplets again. So off you go, guys. You've got another question.
Do the crabs use their fur to feel things?
They use it to feel. Oh, that's a really good question. So lots of animals do. So the hairs, what you actually call the hairs on animals like this are setae. And a lot of them do have receptors in, and that's how they can feel where they are. So it would make sense that these crabs do that. And I can't actually remember if they do or not, but I would imagine, yes, that they would have some kind of, you know how I said there was lots of receptors all over the body so they can feel their environment where they are. I would imagine, yes, they use their hair to feel. So a bit like, you know, like cats have whiskers. And they can feel there as well. So the whiskers, that's a cat, when it's trying to go see something big, it can feel if its whiskers brush something. So yes, it's very similar to that. So I can imagine that these crabs do. I can't 100% tell you that these exact crabs do, but I'm 90% sure, because most animals that have hair do use them to feel. But that's a really good question. I enjoyed that.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next up, we've got another question from Amelia.
Do the bacteria live inside the vents?
So they don't live inside the vents, because for two reasons. One is it's so hot. although there have been scientists trying to look if there are any bacteria that live in there. I don't think they've discovered any yet, but you know, we can't say for certain because it's really hard for us to get probes inside this vent because it's hot and everything melts. It's really annoying. So I can't say 100% they don't, but I don't think they've discovered any that do yet. But another reason that it would be difficult for these bacteria to live in the vents is because if you think about it, it's a big chimney. And so this water's coming out really quick out of a really small area. So it's like this, and it's really powerful. And so if bacteria were trying to stick to the side of the vent on the inside, this water would constantly be going past them really quickly, and it would keep kind of taking them off the vent. But they do find bacteria in the hydrothermal vent plume when it's going through the water column, like you asked about earlier. So they don't, you know, they're not sure how these bacteria are necessarily in the plume. So it could be that they're coming from outside the inside of the vent, but I don't think they found any there yet. But I will check the literature and let you know if they have.
I've got another question.
That is fine.
How does the vents make the hot water?
How do they make the hot water? Okay, so as you saw in the video earlier, the really cold water from the bottom of the ocean, it sinks into the cracks in the rocks at the bottom of the ocean, the crust. And as it kind of sinks lower and lower, these tectonic plates I was talking about are floating on melted rocks called magma, that orange bit that you saw in the video. And because this cold water sinks and gets closer and closer to the hot melted rocks, that heats up the water. Like you would in a kettle. So if you think of the magma, the orange bit, like a kettle, as the water's getting closer to this kettle inside the earth, the water's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And then finally it gets hot enough that it starts to rise again. So if you think about like a radiator, the hottest, when you go near a radiator, you can feel the heat rising off it, can't you? Like when you put your hands on it, the heat's coming up towards you. So that's what heat does, is it always goes up. Heat never goes down, heat always rises. And so when it gets hot enough, it starts to rise again back through the crust where it came from, and then it will come back out into this cold water, but now it's really, really hot because it's been heated up by these molten melted rocks underneath the earth crust. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I've got one more question.
Of course you can. One more and then we'll let someone else have a go.
Yeah. How deep is the crust?
How deep is the crust? I think it varies all over the world. And I think in these areas where they're found, it's quite thin because it's like at the edge of the plate. So often it gets thicker and thicker. But I can't actually remember how thick the crust is in these areas. I know it varies, but I will find out for you. But it's on the scale of like a couple of kilometres, I think, in that area. So it's quite thick. But then you think of how big the world is. I think on average over the whole world, I think it's something like, I don't know, like 72 kilometres deep or something like that. But I think it gets thinner at the edges. But I'll find that out for you. But it sounds quite big, but when you saw that video, you think about how big the earth is as a big sphere. It's really, really tiny on the outside. It's just like a really thin crust, like the crust of bread. If you think of it like that, so that's why it's called a crust. You think of the crust of the bread, and that's quite thin on the outside, and the inside, or the fluffy bit in the middle, that's basically the molten bit. So that's what the earth is like. It's like a slice of bread. It's got a big crust around the outside, and then the fluffy bit in the middle is all that melted rock. Okay?
Thank you.
Thanks, Amelia. Okay, next up, we've got Ethan again.
I didn't have a question.
Oh, it might be, your hand might be up from before. Don't worry. Okay. Another question we have got is in the chat. What have we got? Are there any jellyfish living by the vent? So you might have seen in the video, there are animals like jellyfish that live near the vent. There's animals called siphonophores and cnidarians, which I can put pictures up of. But you'll have seen like the little blob in the video at the end that was going along. That's very much like a jellyfish. I think it's closely related, but not exactly a jellyfish. But yes, there are lots of gelatinous jellyfish-like animals that live around vents. They don't eat the bacteria. They're not an animal that what we would call endemic to a vent. So it's not that they have to live at hydrothermal vents, but we'd call them an opportunist. So what they're doing is swimming around until they can see that there's lots of organic matter and like mud and things around, and particles in the water for them to be able to eat. And around vents, a lot of this, there's a lot of particles in the water because it's all being kicked up by the animals and the plume. So these jellyfish will come in as opportunists, as the fish will, and lots of other animals as well. And then we've got a question, what's the highest chimney? Oh, that is a good question. I think the highest chimneys are around 30 metres tall. Again, I will check this for you. I don't like to give you the wrong information. I think they're around 30 metres tall. There's certainly some very, very tall ones on the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is in the middle of the Atlantic, kind of by us, and kind of to the west of Europe. If you go into the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, there's a big ridge with lots of these hydrothermal vents along. So a ridge is basically a mountain range that you find under the sea. And that's where there's lots of these vents, and there's a lot of tall ones there. There's one called Car Wash, because it has lots of things growing on it that make it, they're these barnacles basically that are long and stalked, and it makes it look all bushy, like, you know, those big brushes you get in a hydrothermal vent. There's in a car wash. There's ones called Hogwarts as well. People have named them after Harry Potter things. We've got all sorts of names for different hydrothermal vents. But I think the tallest ones are around 30 metres, but I will check that out for you and make sure I give you the right answer. Okay, so does anyone else have any more questions before I wrap up for today? I'll give you about 30 seconds. Did anyone else have any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. So I hope you enjoyed today. I love hydrothermal vents. I think they are really, really awesome. If you have any questions throughout the week about anything to do with hydrothermal vents, then please just post it in the Facebook group. And oh, I think we've had another question pop up. Okay, off you go.
When the animals are swimming up above the deep, can the hot water touch them and burn them a little bit?
So it could, yeah. So if there was like a fish swimming along, it wouldn't be, if it was going really close to the vent, then yes, it would basically be boiled, which would be dreadful. But the really cool thing about animals, well, all animals that live in the deep sea, but all animals that live in the sea, but especially the ones that live in the deep sea, is they have all these receptors all over their body. Because it's dark and they can't see, they need to be really clever and have senses in other ways to know where they are in the water. And so fish have a lot of, like it's called their lateral line, these little bumps all the way along their body. And basically they will use those bumps along their body, and they can detect all the chemicals and movements in the water, and their bodies can tell the temperature. So before they got to the plume, unless the animal was poorly or sick or had something wrong with it, it would be able to tell that it was getting to hotter and more chemical rich water, and so it should swim the other way. But again, if the animal was poorly in some way, then it might not, those bits might not be working properly. But generally, they have very, very clever adaptations to be able to understand the environment around them without being able to see. So it would be quite rare, I imagine, for a fish to accidentally swim into a plume. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone. It's been fabulous. I've loved sharing one of my favourite things in the deep sea with you. Obviously, my favourite is the Yeti crab. It's the only animal in the deep sea, I think, that looks moderately cute. There's that and the Dumbo octopus. I think they're the only ones that look moderately cute, which is sad because there's lots of things happening to our deep sea that means it might be at risk. And so it's really difficult to convince everyone to save all these animals. So I think they're really special. If there's anything else you want to know about hydrothermal vent animals, just post it in the Facebook group, or ask your parents to post it in the Facebook group through the week, and I'll answer the questions for you. I'm not 100% on who your speaker is next week for you, but I promise you they will be fabulous as always. It will be at 1:30 like it always is, the same Zoom link, same time, same day. And thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for all your fabulous questions again. It always makes my day. And I will see you next week. Bye everyone.